Hello again. Tonight we're going to talk about exoplanets that aren't too dramatically dissimilar from Earth, how that would compare to the breadth of environment that exists on Earth that people exist in and thrive in. And instead of going with exoplanets that must be in the Earth-like average, its exoplanets can be in the Earth range. So I was watching a video by Dr. Becky again this week on her YouTube channel, and she was talking about exoplanets in our Milky Way. Instead of them being Earth-like, they were, let's say we altered the chemistry. Are there other dominant chemicals that we can use to replace the ones that we recognize? And could we still have life based upon that? So it's the old, instead of water, we're going to go with methane. Instead of carbon, we're going to go with silicon. How well do these chemical variants work as solvents? At what temperatures, what temperatures and pressures do they exist? And if we're not going to be using oxygen, what pressure does that have to be? And what's the temperature of it? So she went through a number of these scenarios. Yeah, you can theoretically think of that as being life, but it would be very alien to what we think of as life on Earth. We could not exist in those environments, and they could not exist in our environment. We'd need spacesuits to be there. They'd need spacesuits to be here. What if instead of stretching things that far, we just stretched them a little? What is the range of environments here on Earth that people exist in? The typical one is if air pressure changes with altitude, how high is too high, or how too far below sea level, though not below the surface of the water, but below sea level is still okay for humans to exist in. We already know that there are things that are too acidic for human life. We'll get into one of those. And we also know about extremophiles and how they exist around undersea volcanic events and near volcanoes. And we also know that we've recently discovered bacteria on the outside of the International Space Station that's been there for a number of years, existing just fine on the edges of the window frames on the outside of the space station. They're in the vacuum of space under high radiation, too high for humans to exist, but the bacteria are surviving just fine. But we're not talking about that exotic, that alien, that exophile kind of thing. What if it's just maybe not comfortable, but not too extreme for humans? So back in 2022, on April 2nd, I did something called Extraterrestrial Environments, where we talked about extreme exoworlds, where we'd have to wear spacesuits all the time. We'd have to live in pressurized habitats that were maybe radiation hardened, and that's just to exist there, to survive there. But that was more like we're visiting there. We're not really living there. This one's going to be more about maybe we dial it back a little bit, make it a little more like Earth. Not exactly, but kinda. And therefore, we don't need these things. So no spacesuits. You can exist, you can breathe. No habitats. You don't need to be under threat of meteors hitting you or radiation burning you alive. So maybe not shirt sleeves and shorts comfortable, but common dress. Let's just say these are habitable but not comfortable exoworlds. We can still exist there, but maybe not the place we'd like to exist. So let's find out what a human tolerable range would be. No spacesuits, normal clothing. Maybe, you have to wear a parka, but nothing deep Arctic. Tolerable, kind of like the difference between a hot summertime and a cold wintertime here on Earth. No radiation exposure that would be any worse than it is on Earth. No atmospheric pressure, where the air pressure is so low you can't breathe and you have to wear a spacesuit or have oxygen. Because there are places on Earth, there are actually observatories that are so high up in South America that unless you're acclimated, you have to actually walk around with a cylinder of oxygen because you might pass out. I'm not talking about even that high. Maybe you need some protection, like you have to go indoors because it gets sunny during the day, or there might be weather, high winds, monsoon rains, tornadoes and hurricanes, snow and ice storms, just like here on Earth. So you might need habitat for those kinds of protections, but not extreme. It may not be an ideal place for vacations. Might not be like your cup of tea, may not be comfortable, but you can exist there. If you have to work there, you can. Yeah. I've worked in places where if I want to go outside, I'd have to wear winter clothing. But when I was inside, there was heating and it was warm enough. It was human tolerable. Humans thrive in uncomfortable places on Earth. So why don't we think about exoworlds as they don't have to be completely exotic or alien. They can be just a little less our average Earth-like, and we can still be there. There are places on Earth that, despite all the normal stuff, you don't want to go there. I personally have been to Yellowstone National Park, the picture on the right there, that lovely picture. If you look at the top edge, you'll see this little sweeping gray line with a bunch of dots on it. Those are people. That shows you how big that pool is. That pool is extremely acidic, and the colors you see there are different forms of bacteria living in those close to 212-degree boiling acidic water. But occasionally, a dum-dum person will try and leave the walkway and go exploring on the edge of these pools and will break through the surface, and they're not too happy when their leg dissolves off in the acid. So yeah, there's signs that say don't do that. But there are places that we don't go on Earth. When we're visiting the volcanic vents or lava fountains or sulfur or carbon monoxide vents or methane vents, we don't have to do a lot to protect ourselves. We just steer clear of them. In Yellowstone, there were sulfur vents that opened up right in the parking lot, and they just put like a little wooden fence around it and said, don't go over there and breathe that stuff. So we knew not to. If we went over there and started breathing it, we'd probably need hospital care. So even on this planet, even in places we're walking around, we don't even need a submarine or an aircraft. There are places where you don't go, but that's okay. We live in the other places. So if we were talking about the atmosphere, what kind of gases are we talking about? The Earth's atmosphere, on average, it varies a little bit, but on average is 80% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and less than 1% inert non-toxic gases. As long as we're about 20 or so percent, maybe a little more, maybe a little less oxygen, we'll do fine. Nitrogen, well, there are therapeutic environments you could be put into in a hospital where you're breathing pure oxygen. You're like laying there in the bed, you're in the ICU, and they've got a tube in your nose and you're breathing pure oxygen through that. That's because they want the oxygen to get to your lungs and your tissues as a means of therapeutic. Deep sea divers, if you go down really deep and you wear hard suits, then you're to the point where that nitrogen, as you come back up, will bubble out of your bloodstream and give you the bends or nitrogen narcosis. So what they do to mitigate that is they add some helium. So that 80% nitrogen, a portion of it gets replaced by helium. It's still the same pressure, but when you go down that deep, the air pressure inside your living environment gets to be much higher. And instead of squeezing nitrogen into your blood, it squeezes helium into your blood. But the helium is inert, so it's not going to react with your blood. But that's how you avoid nitrogen narcosis. But that's here on this planet. What about temperature? The temperature extremes on Earth are pretty extreme. Minus 129 degrees Fahrenheit. You don't go outside often, and this is in very limited places, but that's way too cold. But there are people that work in those environments. They are at military bases or weather forecasting stations, and when it gets to be below 100 degrees Fahrenheit outside, they don't go outside that often. But when they do, they're wearing multiple layers of parkas, and they might actually have a face mask that has heat in it to make it where they can breathe the air. Otherwise, the frozen air would go into their lungs. We do work. We do exist in these on Earth extreme environments, but how we exist and how we do our jobs. But if you said, what about the other extreme? Yes, there are places on Earth that get to be 134 degrees Fahrenheit. You're not going outside in the sun for that one. You're going to stay indoors because let's say you're wearing plastic soled shoes and you went outside on the pavement. The pavement's going to be over 130 degrees and your plastic soled shoes will probably get sticky and maybe even adhere to the pavement. Not good. You'd have to be wearing leather soled shoes Otherwise, you don't want to go outside. That's not another planet. That's not, an exoplanet. That's here on this planet. There is a thing called the global surface temperature, or the GST. If you average throughout the year the temperature on Earth, it's 59 degrees Fahrenheit. But you say, well, I always thought it was around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. You're discounting all the places where it's cold most of the year, like the Arctic and the Antarctic. So they figure into that average. In the US, the winter average and the summer average are listed there. The winter average is 34 degrees Fahrenheit, slightly above freezing. The summer is 81 degrees. But you say, I know a lot of places that get to be like in the 100 teens, Phoenix, Arizona. It's not unusual to be more than 110 degrees for a couple of weeks. What's the 81? Average, because there are places that even in the summer, they don't get that hot. What we consider Earth comfortable is around 22 degrees Celsius or 72 degrees Fahrenheit. That's quite comfortable, but that's not near the extremes. If you push it off that average, you could still easily survive in environments that were hotter or colder. People that live in colder climates during the wintertime actually knowingly go to warmer places for vacationing. They enjoy it. They move around based upon changes in the periodic environment. The temperature drops during the course of the day vary with the kind of materials that are in the area. I know that when I went out to the desert Southwest and the sun set, it immediately got quite cold because the rocks and the sand lose heat very quickly compared to Florida's more green and damp vegetation. What about the air pressure? The minimum breathable atmosphere is 475 hectopascals. That's hundreds of pascals, which equates to 14.03 inches of mercury. That's your barometric pressure. What is the altitude that you can live at once you become acclimated or acclimatized? How high can you go and still have, places where people live? It's about a little over almost 20,000 feet. Denver, Colorado, for example, has about 716,000 people. They're at the Mile High City, Denver, the Mile High City, 5,280 feet. So the air pressure is going to be less there. And I know that when people go to places like Denver, if they exert themselves too much, they get out of breath easily. And there are places called oxygen bars that you can go in and basically put your snoot into a oxygen feed. It's not 100% oxygen. It's just, a percentage of oxygen. And that will help you to recover. But you might want to know that the state of Massachusetts in the US, oxygen bars are illegal because of these side effects if you breathe oxygen at 100% for too long, or you do goofy stuff like, hey, at the oxygen bar, I drank a lot of alcohol and got really drunk, and then I snorted a lot of oxygen, and I felt better briefly, and then I went out on the highway and drove, and then the intoxication took over again. But we also have in high pollution areas things called air stations, and you'll find these in Tokyo, Japan, and Beijing, China. That's where the outside air is tolerable, but if you have any lung conditions or you're a youngster, you probably want to go visit the air station. This can be simply a room that has good filtered air conditioning and has a lot less pollution in it. But now that they're trying to reduce the air pollution, there's less of a need for these air stations. If you want to know what the highest city is on planet Earth, it's Riconada in Peru, which is at 16.7 thousand feet. 50,000 people live there. The air is very thin, and if you want to go visit there, bring some oxygen. But they live there, they thrive there. So it's preferable if the atmospheric pressure is at least 25.67 inches of mercury. It's preferable if if it's not higher than 31.16, because ears pop, the pressure differential inside your skull gets to be too different with the air outside, and you get a headache. The average atmospheric pressure at sea level is 29.92. And so if you think of it as 475 hectopascals to 1,089 hectopascals, that's a fairly wide range that the human species is tolerant in. It doesn't have to be so low, like on Mars, that there's no air for you to breathe. But let's say it's a planet that has a lot more higher altitude than sea level. Yeah, if it's not too far, humans could probably be there, no problem. What about gravity? Everybody thinks about 1g or gravity at 32 feet per second as an acceleration. It just needs to be tolerable. We can exist outside of that. And in fact, we do under specific circumstances, we kind of like it. We'll do things like vomit comet, where we can briefly experience what amounts to 0G. It's not really 0G, it's just negative gravity, but there's a period of time there, 0G. Or when the elevator drops out as you're going down in a tall building, and ooh, or you go on a roller coaster ride, and it's fun when the roller coaster ride dips. It's not really 0G, it's negative gravity, negative acceleration, actually. You experience that for a brief period of time, and it's fun. There are people that do longer periods. The International Space Station, Tiangong, the Chinese space station, you have to prepare before you go up there by doing weight training. And then once you're up there, you have to do daily exercises to maintain your musculature. Otherwise, you get weaker. You accommodate, you acclimate to it. If you've been up there for a while, like, I don't know, a year or so, and then you come back to Earth, you're very weak. And you may have to like hang out in a stretcher for a day or two and do some resistance exercises to build yourself back up to 1G. But there are people that go through brief periods of 9 times Earth's gravity. Fighter pilots, when they're zooming up or they're doing bank turns, they can get to 9G for a few seconds. When you do a rocket launch, as the rocket is just passing up through the Earth's atmosphere at greater than supersonic speed, and you're trying to get to that, 20,000 miles an hour to orbit, there's a period of time where you're certainly under 6G, but there's like a second or two window where you might get to 9G, and that's just par for the course. We don't say we can't do that. We just tolerate it. People that drive fast cars, they accelerate. How fast can you get 0 to 60? They might get to 1.5 Gs. They like going around the track doing turns or braking rapidly, and that could get you to like negative 2G. But then there's these places that we go, like indoor skydiving, where you're just suspended by air pressure. You think of it as 0G when it's not really. But if we took all of the environmental parameters and we said, we now know that range and we can exist in this range, and what else do we need to exist on a regular basis to thrive, to do more than just be a tourist? The Earth goes on its axis about every 24 hours. And if you think of that as the sleep-wake cycle, if you put people in the Arctic or the Antarctic for long periods of time where there's not much sunlight above the horizon for 6 months out of the year, people get loopy. They get depressed. They need to see that periodic sun. Otherwise, it causes psychological problems. The same thing holds true if you have soldiers out in the middle of desert heat and you have them out there too long. It's not like it bakes them. It just gets, it starts to affect them psychologically. And if you're on Arctic duty, even if you have the sunlight, it's too cold for too long a period of time, and it gets to be burdensome. People need relief from that. But they can exist, 6 months at a time. They're no problem. Having a daily day-night cycle improves the situation. You often hear, you need to get a good 8 hours sleep. That is not how the human physiology works. That is what we came to exist under as a result of industrialization and artificial lighting starting in the early 1900s. As kind of lab rats, they took some subjects and they exposed them to long periods of no sleep. And then they allowed them to sleep for as long as they needed to feel recovered, to feel normal again. And it turns out human behavior is daily sleep is 2 4-hour segments with 1 to 4 hours between them. So they actually proved out in human psychological testing that it's normal behavior for people to sleep 4 hours, get up, do some things, maybe have something to eat, and then, after a few hours, go back to sleep for another 4 hours. I know that since I've retired and my time is my own, that's kind of how I exist. I might stay up until 5 a.m., go to sleep for 4 or 5 hours, wake up, have something to eat, do some things, and then in the afternoon go back to sleep for another 3 or 4 hours. And I feel fine. But I like this reference. If you remember the movie Men in Black, the first one, the leader of the Men in Black, Zed, he was describing to new recruit, don't you people sleep around here? Because everybody was up and doing things, looked like all the time. The two aliens that actually ran all the technology in the information center, they were referred to as the twins. One of them had an unpronounceable name, and the other one was Bob. Zed described it as the twins keep us on Sontaran time. It's a standard 37-hour day. Give it a few months, you'll get used to it, or you'll have a psychotic episode. I like to think of it as the same thing. When they put these people through these extended periods of day, and it was not 37 hours, it was 32 hours, kind of like what you see physicians undergoing in their career experience as an intern. They get put on shifts where 24 hours, 36 hours. Yeah, and I'm sure that really helps. A day period, daylight, those are things that help. Also having distinct seasons. There are people that live in Florida that I miss the winter time. There are people that live in Arctic places that go, I don't remember it ever getting warm enough for me to go outside and do things. That's why you see people that live in northern climates that are accustomed to the cold, when it gets to be 50 degrees outside, they're at the beach. They're wearing beach wear. They're in shorts, short sleeve shirts. And people that come from South Florida, like, are you nuts? When it gets below 72 degrees, it's too cold. People get acclimated. An exoplanet that's rotationally locked to its star might present psychological issues as it would disrupt our circadian rhythms. In the wide variety of environmental parameters on Earth, what kind of species that's sentient lives, operates, drives, and thrives here? Humans. Okay, well, if we look at all those parameters, there are people living in a variety of places, and the variety of human instances, the varieties of people, is pretty wide. You can have, in the same area, you can have tall people, short people, slim people, heavy people, different appearances of people, different hair, different skin colors, different hair colors, different amounts of hair on their bodies. And all of these people can live in these same hospitable and inhospitable environments. We've had people move all around the planet, so we don't know what the actual most appropriate human existence is for what would be the average place on Earth, because any of these sorts of people can survive and thrive. And if you take it to the next level and say, well, this is the intelligent dominant species on the planet, what's the core principles of those? And we find out there's a variety of languages, there's different levels of intelligence, education, trained skills, different education levels, their life learned experiences, as well as emotional and psychological range of empathy and leadership, and all of that exists on this planet. Take that as the wide definition, and now you've got to ask yourself, well, if we expand it from just the average of what it means to be Earth-like and what it means to be a human, and we broaden that out to the wide range definition that exists on this planet, now we take that out into the galaxy and we find out that, well, just what we thought to be Earth-like and maybe has life on it might support a variety of sentient life that would fit well on Earth. Maybe in one of these more extreme environments, colder or warmer, or higher or lower, or might look a little different, but exclusivity of the human species within the galaxy is less and less probable. So stop looking for exoplanets that are precisely identical to the averages of Earth. Start looking for, maybe a little flexibility in that. Air air pressure, temperature, gravity. You don't need spacesuits or hardened habitats as long as it's long duration tolerable environments that fit within these Earth averages. But it sounds like they at least need a day night and a summer winter for mental health. They may not be a place where you choose to vacation, but working there might be fine, might be able to survive there easily, potentially thrive, especially if you were getting a salary to work there. The number of places that would be considered as human compatible exoplanets, I think, just went up. Given the variety of humans that exist on this planet that work amongst us as professionals, tourists, immigrants, refugees, if they came from one of these other environments, how would you know? And if you didn't know, why would it matter? And then we, as usual, have links. There's a link to the 2022 video that I did and Dr. Becky's video. If you didn't know what an extremophile was. And then for those people that think, oh, the whole planet's 1G, one Earth gravity. Nope. You can go to that link in variations in Earth gravity. There's actually a color Earth globe that shows you where Earth gravity is a little more or a little less. And then the fascinating article from the BBC on segmented sleep, or sleep shouldn't be 8 hours. It should be 4 hours, a couple hours awake doing some minimal stuff, eating, drinking, and then go back to sleep for about another 4 hours. Okay. Anybody learn anything new?
I remember coming here when I first came to Florida. The temperature got to be like 65 degrees for some reason. Everybody was walking around like they were in the North Pole,
Mm-hmm.
dressed with hoodies and gloves and all kinds of. And I'm laughing. I'm saying, that's so funny. Because it was 74 degrees where I came from,
Yeah. And then years later, it's like, oh my God, it got to be 68 degrees. It's so cold.
I'm like that too now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think I want to go back where it's cold.
Well, in my career, I've been all over this planet, different countries, different environments. I've been in some, the typical winter environments where you got to go scrape the rental car out from underneath the ice and snow when you come out to, go to your remote office to do some work. And you have to bundle up and, you get sweaty inside the clothes that you're wearing bundled up because you're out there scraping away the ice and snow. And you think to yourself, how is this tolerable? And then you look at all the people that are around you and all doing the same thing, and they live there. Okay, well, I've been to places where they had literally monsoon rain for that many days in a row, that heavy. Like that's, or I've been out on this is kind of weird. Long Island. I've been out on Long Island when it was 99 degrees with high humidity. That was worse than any day I ever existed in Florida.
Yeah.
Because there was no wind. There was enough tree vegetation around. It blocked out all the wind, and close to 100 degrees and close to 100% humidity, the air was not breathable because it was too warm. Your body couldn't expel the heat, and you had to go indoors. So you could be outside for until maybe 10 or 11 a.m. And then there would be a part of the day where you would need to be indoors until it got to be late in the afternoon when the heat would leave and, okay, you can go outside for maybe an hour or two before sunset. That was on Long Island, out in the middle of the Circus casino parking lot, giant acreage of asphalt. When it was 112 degrees, you would start walking out towards where your car was in the center of the parking lot, and you couldn't breathe because the heat evacuated the air pressure out there, and it was so hot you couldn't respirate. So you would start walking out in the parking lot, and you'd have to turn around and come back. So you couldn't go get your car in the middle of the day. My brother-in-law, who was used to more extreme things, went out there. He was wearing shorts because he wanted to be comfortable. He could not sit in the car because the car seats were like 120 degrees. It would fry him. So he very quickly learned to shut the car, come back in where I was, where it was air conditioned. I've also been in Phoenix, Arizona. You look up in the sky, you see it's raining, and the humidity is so low, the rain evaporates before it hits the ground. And these are places where there's people, tourists, huge quantities of tourism, people living there, and it's just fine. You can become acclimated. But is it conducive to people being there? Doesn't matter. People get acclimated to it. So that's what I was trying to point out is there are extreme places on Earth that we just take it for granted, accommodate, fine, or okay to tourism there, but I wouldn't want to live there. And that's why I live in South Florida is I've been all over the planet. I've been into some extreme environments and I kind of like it here because it has a day and a night and it has kind of, the skies at different tilt angles. So it does have kind of a summer and a few days of cooler air, so winter. But the rest of the time it's level, it's acceptable. You don't have to think about it. When I was talking to people that I worked with that lived up in more northern climes in the wintertime, I said, why don't you come up here closer to the main office? I said, because I never want to have to think about what I'm going to wear when I go outside. Otherwise, I might die from exposure. So, no, I never want to have to think about, oh, did I put the chains on the car's tires? Did I take off the chains? Did I pack the emergency prep kit in case my car slides off the road during an ice storm and I wound up in a ditch for 2 days until somebody found me? So I had to put like water and non-perishable food provisions in my car. Yeah, I don't want to have to think about those kind of things. But that's here on this planet. Okay. It was just something to think about. And Dr. Becky was taking it to an extreme. So I said, let's bring it back and describe the extremes that we find totally acceptable.
That
Okay.
cold weather influenced Henry Flagler. In 1895 and 1894, they had a killer freeze that didn't reach Miami, so he decided to bring his train all the way to Miami.
Yes. And
And that's a
when,
problem
when
with
I was
Miami.
in elementary school in Fort Lauderdale, we had snow one morning when I went to school, and it wasn't snowing when I left the house. When I got to school, it started snowing as we first went to class, and the teacher said, "Okay, everybody go outside." It wasn't cold enough where you had to wear winter clothes. It was just cold enough where it started to snow and the snow hit the ground. It didn't even last a minute and it was gone. And they said, now you know what snow's like. That was my first experience with snow was in elementary school. So,
Yes.
okay. Any comments or questions before I stop recording?
Oh, this, now I know that I'm living the right way. I like my 4 hours and then do something else and go back for a while, another two
Yes.
hours or so.
Yes.
It works much better that way.
That's normal human physiology and psychology.
Well, I'm glad I'm normal because
It's the people that said we want industrial workers that will work 8 hours a day and then they can go home and sleep. Or it's good if you get 8 full hours of sleep because that leaves 16 hours available for you to go to work for 8 hours.
yeah.
That's why you have an 8 hour day.
I once told my boss that I needed 2 naps a day.
Well, there are some places on Earth that do have a siesta in the afternoon.
Yeah.
That's normal.
They're getting rarer, though.
Yes, because of industrialization and putting people to work for longer hours. And yeah. Okay, I'll stop recording.